used to be a lifeguard at a popular beach in Southern California. It was a great job, sun, surf, and plenty of people to watch over. But there was one summer that changed everything for me. It was early July, and the beach was packed with tourists and locals enjoying the warm weather. One day, as I was perched in my lifeguard tower, scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble, I noticed a group of teenagers playing in the waves. Among them was a young girl, probably around 15 or 16, who seemed to be struggling against the current. I grabbed my binoculars for a better look and saw that she was waving her arms, clearly in distress. I blew my whistle and grabbed the rescue board, sprinting down the sand toward the water. As I paddled out, I kept my eyes locked on her. But then, something strange happened. Just as I was getting close, she vanished beneath the surface. I dove in after her, frantically searching the water, but she was gone. I swam back to shore, my heart pounding, and radioed for backup. My colleagues and I spent hours searching the water and the surrounding beach, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had just disappeared into thin air. The police were called, and a full search was launched, but nothing was found. The beach was closed for the rest of the day, and I was questioned extensively by the authorities. I described everything I had seen, but it made no sense. The other kids in the group claimed they hadn't even noticed she was gone until I started searching for her. Weeks went by, and the beach slowly returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I began hearing rumors from other lifeguards about a similar incident that had happened years before, but I dismissed it as superstition. Then, one night I was closing up the lifeguard tower when I saw her. The girl from the water, standing on the shore, staring out at the ocean. She was drenched, her clothes clinging to her body, and her eyes were wide with terror. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked into the water, disappearing beneath the waves once again. I raced down to the beach, but by the time I got there, she was gone. The next day, I reported what I had seen to my supervisor, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. No one else had seen her, and there was no evidence she had ever been there. The incident haunted me for the rest of the summer. Every time I looked out at the water, I wondered if I would see her again. Eventually, I quit my job and moved away, unable to handle the stress and fear that had taken over my life. To this day, I don't know what happened to that girl, or why she seemed to reappear only to vanish again. All I know is that something sinister lurks beneath the surface of that beach, and I pray that no one else ever has to experience what I did. Every summer, my family and I took a trip to a beachside cabin that had been in our family for generations. Nestled on a quiet stretch of the coast, the cabin offered an escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. I cherished those summer days spent swimming in the ocean, building sandcastles, and collecting seashells. But one summer, something happened that would haunt me for years to come. It was a particularly hot July afternoon, and I decided to go for a swim to cool off. The beach was almost deserted, with only a few other families scattered along the shore. I waded into the water, relishing the cool waves as they lapped against my skin. The ocean was calm, with only the occasional ripple breaking the surface. As I swam farther out, I noticed something unusual. A figure was bobbing in the water about 50 yards away. It looked like a person, but their movements were strange and erratic. At first I thought it was someone snorkeling or diving, but there was no snorkel or diving equipment in sight. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. Instead, they continued to bob up and down, their head dipping below the surface and then reappearing. Concerned, I swam closer, but as I approached, the figure seemed to move farther away, as if it was avoiding me. I decided to swim back to shore and get help. When I reached the beach, I told my parents and a nearby lifeguard about the strange figure in the water. The lifeguard grabbed a pair of binoculars and scanned the area I had indicated, but he couldn't see anything unusual. "Are you sure you saw someone out there?" he asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. "I swear I saw someone," I insisted. "They were just out there, bobbing in the water." The lifeguard nodded and agreed to take a closer look. He paddled out on his surfboard, while I watched anxiously from the shore. After a few minutes, he returned, shaking his head. "There's no one out there," he said. "Maybe you were just seeing things. The sun can play tricks on your eyes." I knew what I had seen, but I couldn't explain it. For the rest of the day, I felt uneasy, as if I was being watched. That night, I had trouble sleeping, the image of the bobbing figure replaying in my mind. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk along the beach. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the sand and surf. As I walked, I noticed something glinting in the sand. I bent down to pick it up and discovered it was an old, tarnished locket. Curious, I opened the locket and found a small photograph inside. It was a picture of a young woman in a swimsuit, smiling brightly. There was something familiar about her, but I couldn't quite place it. I slipped the locket into my pocket and continued my walk. Later that day, I showed the locket to my grandmother, hoping she might recognize the woman in the photograph. As soon as she saw the picture, her face went pale. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "On the beach this morning," I replied. "Do you know who she is?" My grandmother nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's my sister, Lily. She drowned here over 50 years ago." A chill ran down my spine. I had never heard of Lily before. My grandmother rarely spoke about her past, and I had no idea she had lost a sister. She explained that Lily had been a strong swimmer, but one day she went out for a swim and never returned. Her body was never found, and it was assumed she had been caught in a rip current and swept out to sea. I showed my grandmother the spot where I had found the locket, and she stood there for a long time, staring out at the ocean. "I always felt like she was still out there," she said softly, "watching over us." That evening, I decided to go for another swim, hoping to find some closure. As I waded into the water, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The ocean was still and quiet, and for the first time in days, I felt at peace. Suddenly, I felt a gentle tug on my ankle. I looked down, expecting to see a piece of seaweed, but there was nothing there. I took a deep breath and dived underwater, opening my eyes to the clear blue depths. To my astonishment, I saw the figure again. This time, it was unmistakably Lily, her hair flowing around her like a halo. She looked at me with a serene expression, and I felt an overwhelming sense of connection. She nodded once, as if to say, "Thank you," and then slowly faded away. I surfaced, gasping for air, and swam back to shore. I told my grandmother what I had seen, and she smiled through her tears. "She's at peace now," she said, "and so am I." That summer changed my life forever. I no longer feared the unknown, and I felt a deep connection to my family's history. I still visit the beach every year, and each time I leave a flower at the spot where I found the locket in memory of Lily. Working as a lifeguard at a secluded beach in the Pacific Northwest, I always felt a sense of peace and isolation. The beach was less crowded than most, and I enjoyed the solitude and the opportunity to help the occasional visitor. It was the perfect summer job, or so I thought. One late afternoon, the weather began to change abruptly. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up, making the waves rough and choppy. The beach was nearly empty, so I decided to close up early and head home before the storm hit. As I packed my things, I noticed something unusual. A figure was sitting on the old, abandoned lifeguard stand a few hundred yards down the beach. The stand had been out of use for years, weathered and worn by the elements. No one ever went near it, and I found it odd that someone would choose to sit there, especially with a storm approaching. Curious, I grabbed my binoculars to get a better look. It was a young woman, her long hair blowing wildly in the wind. She appeared to be staring out at the sea, completely oblivious to the impending storm. I called out to her, but the wind carried my voice away. Concerned for her safety, I started walking toward the stand. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The air around the stand felt colder, and a chill ran down my spine. The woman's figure remained eerily still, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When I was about 50 feet away, she suddenly turned her head to look at me. Her face was pale and expressionless, her eyes hollow and dark. I froze in my tracks, unable to move or speak. The air felt heavy, as if an unseen force was pressing down on me. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked around, but there was no sign of her. The lifeguard stand was empty, and the beach was deserted. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had just seen. Had I imagined it? Was it a trick of the light? I decided to investigate the stand, hoping to find some explanation. As I climbed the rickety steps, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The wood creaked under my weight, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder. At the top of the stand, I found something chilling. Scratched into the wood were the words, "Help me." The writing looked old, weathered by time, but it was clear enough to send shivers down my spine. I quickly descended the stand and headed back to my lifeguard post, my heart racing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman and the message. The next day, I did some research and discovered a tragic story. Decades ago, a young lifeguard had drowned while trying to rescue a swimmer during a storm. The lifeguard stand had been closed ever since, and locals believed her spirit still haunted the beach. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered her ghost. Over the next few weeks, I experienced more strange occurrences. Unexplained cold spots, whispers in the wind, and fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye. The beach, once my sanctuary, had become a place of fear and mystery. Eventually, I decided to quit my job and move away. The experience left me questioning the boundaries between the living and the dead. I still think about that haunted lifeguard stand and the young woman who seemed trapped in an endless loop of despair. I'll never forget the look in her eyes and the message she left behind. It serves as a haunting reminder that some spirits never find peace, forever tied to the place of their tragic end. When I think back to that day on the beach, I can still feel the chill in the air, despite the sun beating down. My friends and I had decided to take a weekend trip to a secluded beach, known for its pristine beauty and clear waters. Little did we know that this beach held a dark secret that would haunt us forever. We arrived early in the morning, eager to claim a good spot and set up our gear. The beach was almost empty, with only a few other groups scattered along the shoreline. We laid out our towels, pitched a small tent, and unloaded our cooler filled with drinks and snacks. Everything seemed perfect. As the day wore on, we enjoyed swimming, sunbathing, and playing beach volleyball. Around midday, the beach started to fill up with more people. We noticed a young couple setting up their spot, not too far from ours. They seemed friendly and exchanged smiles with us as they spread out their blanket and set up a beach umbrella. A few hours later, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the waves grew stronger and the water colder. My friend Jake suggested we take one last swim before packing up. The water was freezing, but we laughed and splashed around, enjoying the last moments of our beach day. Suddenly, we heard a panicked scream coming from the direction of the young couple. We turned to see the woman frantically pointing towards the water. Her boyfriend was nowhere to be seen. We quickly swam back to shore and ran over to her. She was in tears, shouting that he had gone into the water and never come back up. A sense of dread washed over us as we scanned the horizon. The lifeguards were alerted, and they immediately began a search, calling in reinforcements and using jet skis to comb the area. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the beach. The atmosphere grew tense and somber as everyone watched, hoping for a miracle. The search continued into the night, but there was no sign of the missing swimmer. The lifeguards called off the search, citing dangerous conditions and poor visibility. They promised to resume at first light, but the woman was inconsolable. She kept repeating that he had just vanished, as if the ocean had swallowed him whole. We packed up our things in silence, the joy of the day completely overshadowed by the tragedy. As we walked back to our car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The beach, which had seemed so inviting and beautiful in the morning, now felt menacing and foreboding. That night we stayed at a nearby motel, unable to sleep. The next morning we returned to the beach, hoping for some news. The search had resumed, but the lifeguards looked grim. By noon, they had to call it off once again. The young man's body was never found. In the days that followed, the local news reported on the incident, but there were no answers. The authorities suggested that he might have been caught in an undercurrent or pulled out to sea, but no one could explain why there had been no struggle or cry for help. Years have passed since that fateful day, but I still think about the vanishing swimmer every time I visit the beach. The memory of his girlfriend's desperate screams and the helpless feeling of watching the search unfold are etched into my mind. It's a haunting reminder of how quickly a perfect day can turn into a nightmare, and how the ocean can keep its dark secrets hidden beneath the surface.